Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and the conversations. Now that we've learned about God's plan for marriage, it's time to talk about how to put that plan into action and develop some good practices and habits. This afternoon, the Popcaks will be speaking to us about how to construct our marriage castle and develop some habits that couples can develop together to build solid marriages. So let's welcome the Popcaks again.
All right. Wow, look, they stuck around. Go figure. Excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, as we get started, you know how it is. If it doesn't happen on social media, it doesn't happen. So everybody smile, right? Get in there, Elise. Ready? Got my thumb out of the way. There we go. Say cheese. Hey. Perfect. All right, thank you. There you go. All right. Well, this morning, one of the things we were talking a lot about was that the idea of couple prayer, about having a sacramental worldview, and really one of the most beautiful prayers in marriage. In fact, perhaps the most intimate prayer in marriage, and you might not be used to thinking about it this way, but it is a prayer, is our physical relationship, our sexual relationship as couples. And really, it surprises people often to hear that marriage is actually the sacrament of sex, believe it or not. It's not the sacrament of doing dishes together, it's the sacrament of sex. And because every part of us needs to be redeemed. Not just our minds and our hearts. Pope Francis just released an apostolic exhortation on holiness the other day, where he talked in that document about the danger of Gnosticism, that a lot of times as Catholics we fall into these sort of false models of holiness, and one of those being Gnosticism. Well, Gnosticism grew up alongside of Christianity and still is alive and well in the church, and basically Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, right? So it's this idea that being holy means studying theology and thinking godly thoughts and doing and just kind of being spiritual, right? But not being in our bodies, right? For the Christian, Christianity is an embodied faith. Christ came as a person in a body. He emptied himself and became a human being so that we could see him and touch him and experience his love in a physical way. He gives himself to us totally and completely and empties himself to us, and he asks for an embodied response to that in return. And so if we're pursuing a holy life, that doesn't just mean loving him with our heart, our mind, and our soul, but also with our strength, our body as well. In 1 Corinthians 6:15, it says, "Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit with whom you have been gifted by God, and that you are not your own, for you have been purchased for a price? Therefore glorify God in your body." So in marriage, in the Catholic vision of marriage, we have this sacramental worldview. We recognize that sexuality is a prayer that allows us to invite God to teach us how to love each other with the bodies that he's given us. Remember, in the Catholic vision of marriage, when we first started our last talk, we said that in Catholic marriage, we're saying, I have feelings for this person, but I don't know what to do with them, really. I have love for this person, but I don't know how to love this person. And so I want to spend my life learning how to love this person the way God wants me to. And that doesn't just mean with my heart and with my mind, but it means with my body as well. And so, when people say, well, what right does the church tell us what to do in the bedroom? Well, if you got married in the church, you gave them that right.
And not just to give you a bunch of my own.
Yeah, you got to hit the button on the one. There.
Thanks. It's not just about giving them the right to make a bunch.
Not yet. Try again. No, don't hit it. Just let it catch up.
It's green now.
Talk into it and see.
You good? Can you hear me now?
No.
It's green. We might need a new battery.
That one works.
Hi.
Thanks. Father Mark to the rescue.
Thank
Yay.
you, Father. What would we do without our priests? It's not just about giving them the right to give you a bunch of rules and regulations.
It's about giving them the right to teach you how to love well. And here's a mind-blowing concept. As I said this morning, when we stand up and take those vows and make those promises, that's the beginning of the sacrament. We live our sacrament all day long, but the pinnacle of that sacrament is the sexual expression of that sacrament. And when you find each other in that marital embrace, that's actually a renewal of your wedding vows. That's really shocking. That every time you're together in that way, it is a renewal of your wedding vows. That gets rid of the ugly of the world real fast. There's a huge difference between holy sex, which is the most passionate, most fulfilling, most wonderful experience you can have together, and what the world thinks of as sex, which is really just eroticism. Now, we don't have a ton of time to address any of that, but we have a whole book on it called Holy Sex, and if you're thinking, oh, no, they're out of their minds now, I offer you to take a look at that conversation, because it will really transform your life.
Well, the reality is, the world thinks of sex as recreation.
Right.
It's a nice thing to do if you have the time and the energy for it at the end of the day. And the reality is, most couples don't have the time and energy for it at the end of the day. So you just don't do it. In fact, 30% of couples live in sexless marriages these days.
Or they whine or they fight over that part of their relationship.
But the church asks you to not think of sex as recreation, but a recreation of your wedding day, a recreation of your vows to say I do to each other in a language that transcends words, in a language that says, you know what, we've been loving and serving each other so much all day long that even our bodies have learned to work for each other's good. And so, that's why we want to be here with each other, even on those days when we don't necessarily feel like swinging from the chandeliers. It's wonderful to be able to fall into the arms of that one person who really gets you and who really is looking out for you and really cares for you. But even there, sometimes we can be in a place where we end up unintentionally maybe using each other. And we recognize that our sexuality is something that can be used in really hurtful ways. I mean, gosh, just look at the world, at all the different ways the world uses its sexuality to hurt people and to use them and to treat them as objects. And so even our bodies need to be redeemed, right? Even it's not God, we believe in the resurrection of the body. We're not just going to die and be spirits in heaven. One day we're going to be joined with our glorified bodies. And so our bodies even need to be redeemed. We need to be able to give that bodily response to God. And that's why, for example, priests and religious make this vow of celibacy, because they give their bodies to God as an embodied yes to Christ's invitation to discipleship, so that they can serve the whole church. But we as lay people are having this opportunity to give our bodies to God and learn how to express our love physically for each other by learning how to live out the church's teaching of sexuality in our marriage, which includes natural family planning, which I understand that many people, even most Catholics, don't do, but I think we're missing out. And in fact, we can tend to have more Gnostic marriages than Christian marriages if we don't live the teachings of the church in our relationship, in our most intimate part of our relationship, because we're not figuring out how God wants us to love each other with the body that he gave us. And we're not giving him our bodies to say, Lord, redeem even this part of me as well. Because we recognize that the body, as I said, has to be redeemed, and there are sort of three lessons that the Catholic school of love, that is marriage, wants us to learn about our bodies. Number one, that the body is a prayer. Number two, that our body is in need of healing. And number three, our bodies are meant to be a gift. So the first idea, that our bodies are meant to be a prayer. Well, how are our bodies a prayer? That sounds like kind of a weird idea. Prayer is something that you do when you kneel and you bless yourself. But no, our prayer, St. John Vianney said, is nothing less than union with God. Okay? We're meant to be in union with God, and we're meant to communicate God's love to the world, to each other, through the body that he gave us. We are his hands in the world. We are the body of Christ. Our physical body, when we give it to God and ask him to teach us how to love others through that body, is a prayer. And so when we give God our body, especially in marriage, and say, Lord, teach me how to love this person through the body that you gave me, he's going to challenge us to bring our desires to him, to bring our relationship to him, and to ask him to lead us step by step to a love that is free and total and faithful and fruitful, instead of a love that uses the other person or lets our sexual relationship just be something that scratches an itch, instead of, as Pope Benedict writes in Deus Caritas Est, allows us to rise in ecstasy toward the divine.
And this is a place where natural family planning really comes into play. Because if you've heard of it at all, you probably have only really heard of it as, okay, you look at these bodily signs and you chart a bunch of stuff and then you know when you can and when you can't, and that's it. And it's so much more than that. It's actually a discernment tool. It's a discernment tool that begins to let both members of the couple understand how holy the human body is when you see how a woman's body works and the rhythms of that body, when you begin to clue into those, and then you take time to pray and you say, okay, what's God asking for our marriage and our family tonight or this month? Is he asking us to take some time and really use a lot of self-denial and control so that we can really work on other things, a relationship with a child, a particular circumstance in our life, our marriage? Or is he asking us to be open to the fullness of this and possibly bring another child into the world? And it becomes a discernment process where, when done with this idea that our body is a prayer and that we're meant to serve one another and love one another, it's no longer, okay, well, you figure out what the signs are and then let me know what's going on tonight. Right. It's all about, how do I love you as best as I possibly can? How do I uphold you, and how do I keep from using you? And there are really wonderful ways. In fact, the 8 pillars that we're going to be talking about are going to show you how to love each other all day long and serve each other all day long, so that this kind of discernment lifestyle makes real sense.
And so when you're bringing this part of your relationship to God, remember earlier we talked about praying in conflict and saying, okay, God, I know what I want and she knows what she wants. What do you want? Well, what a beautiful thing to be able to bring our sexuality to God and be able to say, okay, God, I know what I want and I know what she wants. What do you want? Help us to be able to love each other with that love and give us the family that you want us to have, both in terms of the number of children that we have, but also in terms of the quality of family life that we've got. Because by bringing God our love that way, he asks us to really kind of step back and consider the whole relationship. And like Lisa was just saying, is this a month where we really should be working on the closeness in this marriage or in the closeness in this family and working through certain issues spiritually or emotionally or psychologically or financially or whatever that we have to deal with? Or is this a month where you're saying, there's really so much love here that it needs to be given its own name in the form of another child?
Yes, and if you're past that point in your life, it's still a part of your relationship, a sacramental part of your relationship that needs to be prayed about, so that you don't fall into, well, we can just use each other because we don't have to worry about whether we're going to get pregnant or not. But really bringing yourselves as gift to one another, to treat each other as people to be loved and not objects to be used.
That second idea in the Catholic school of love about sexuality, our body needs healing. We all recognize, for example, that diet and exercise is a really important thing. None of us like to do it. I hate it personally. But let's face it. If we always eat everything we want to eat, we're unhealthy. If we just lay around like we want to lay around, that's not healthy. So we motivate ourselves to try to eat a little bit better or exercise a little bit more. And that's hard, but we recognize it as good. Well, the same thing is true about our body's desire for love and sexuality. If we express that only in every way that our body wants to, we can sometimes hurt other people and even hurt ourselves, right? And so natural family planning is an opportunity to really bring our bodies to God and say, okay, Lord, just like with diet and exercise, teach me how to love bodily in a way that actually glorifies you, works for my good and the good of my spouse. And the last lesson that the church wants us to learn in the Catholic school of love about our sexuality is that our bodies are a gift. And that when we give ourselves totally to each other, what we're really trying to do is not just have fun in this moment. We're doing that, but it's more than that. It's about being able to say, everything I have, everything I am, mentally, physically, emotionally, I give to you. It's all yours, and I receive everything that you have to give back to me. I'm not putting any barriers on that. I'm not saying, I only want this part of you, or I only want that part that makes me feel good. I want it all, everything. We give mutually to each other and receive mutually from each other. And natural family planning allows us to do that in ways that other forms of family planning just don't. And so, if you've heard of NFP and just sort of snickered at it as Catholic contraception,
Or it scared you to death, which it can.
yeah, or you just really didn't understand, it's not a bunch of rules, it's not just this Catholic weird thing, it's really an invitation to make your sexual life a prayer and to begin to bring all that stuff we talked about this morning into the most intimate part of your marriage, so that even your sexual life can glorify God, work for each other's good, and help you both become everything that you were created to be in this life, and help each other get to heaven in the next.
Right, to find great healing and great joy. So if you're curious, there's a great NFP table right over in where you had lunch. Check it out, and nobody's asking you to just like, okay, I'll just go do NFP. I have no idea what I'm doing. There are people there to teach you and walk you through things, and there are great programs, and I really encourage you to check it out for yourself.
But the other thing that, Lisa was pointing out about how the church's view of sex is really different. When we talk about sex, I think everybody sort of thinks it's the same thing. The world's view of sex is more what we would call eroticism. It's unintentionally using each other in a way that makes me feel good, hopefully makes the other person feel good, but it's really about just what happens in this moment. Holy sex is really bigger than that. It's about how can we learn to love each other physically in a way that glorifies God and helps us become everything we were created to be. But that kind of love, that kind of vulnerability, being able to pray about your physical relationship. When we talk about prayer and sex, that blows people's minds. And I think a lot of people kind of have this idea of sort of kneeling on opposite sides of the bed, just going like, Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, bless us while we do this, amen, okay, And it's not, it's terrifying, right? But to be able to bring your spiritual life into that dimension of your relationship allows you to bring your whole self to the bedroom in a way that's really powerful and really beautiful. But in order to have that kind of vulnerability, it has to begin in the rest of your relationship. And so there are 8 qualities that research has really shown that healthy couples celebrate in their relationship to varying degrees, that any couple can learn, that every couple has to learn. But if you want to have especially the kind of physical relationship that the church wants you to have, that kind of truly intimate, truly mutually self-donative, truly spiritual relationship, you really have to have these qualities. And in addition to these, we're just going to talk through these 8 habits, but in addition to that, just like we said this morning with the whole idea of a sacramental worldview, with each of these habits comes a certain virtue that we can practice in the family school of love. That it's not just about doing these things so we can have a good relationship, it's also doing these things so that as we do them, we can grow in holiness and those virtues that enable us to celebrate life as a gift as well. So we're going to go through these 8 building blocks of the marriage castle. Right? Just like Saint Teresa of Avila talked about the interior spiritual castle. In our vision of marriage spirituality, we're going to talk about the 8 building blocks of the marriage spiritual castle.
And we'll just go through them one at a time rather than list them at first, just for the essence of time. The first one is rituals of connection. If you've ever heard our show, you've probably heard us talk about this.
We'll go into all of
because
these in more
it's
detail.
so
But
vital. That the virtue that goes with this is the virtue of justice. And justice is getting what's right. Having what is right happen for each person in this situation.
and giving the relationship its due.
Yeah, exactly. Because marriage isn't just an accessory. A lot of us think that. It's like, okay, I got married, I've rubber stamped that, and now I can say I'm married when I check off, that space on Mr. or Mrs. whatever, and I can go on and have my life, right? I keep looking for my personal satisfaction, but my marriage is over here. And marriage isn't an accessory, it's an activity that you have to be heavily and actively involved in, and it takes time, daily and weekly. And I can see all your faces, you're going, oh my golly, they're giving us one more thing to do. I don't have any more time for this. We're not, actually. We're going to make you, this is probably the best time management technique you'll ever hear. And it will be the most fruitful.
Well, this is one of the ways that Catholic families can really be revolutionary, can really evangelize the culture just by being a Catholic family. Because the world tells us that relationship is supposed to happen in the 15 minutes that we have in the car as we drive the kids to the next activity.
And he's not kidding. There's actually been studies done that say some families have as little as 15 minutes a day together now, and I know that there are fewer. My daughter is working as a counselor in a school right now, and one of her students gets to school at 7 a.m. for drop-off and breakfast, and gets picked up from after-school care at midnight because mom and dad are working so hard. They're doing everything they can, but when you do see each other, you've got to make the most of it. And these rituals of connection are going to help you make the most of that time, whether it's that 15 minutes in the car or more that you can actually do together. And the rituals of connection that each family has to have daily and more time for it weekly is work, play, talk, and prayer. And again, I see the eyes. You're going, how the heck am I going to fit that in? Because we think about these ideas of, oh, we got to play together. Well, now I've got to go out and shoot hoops with my kid for, an hour, and they don't want to anyway, and how is that going to happen? And when do we have time to sit down and talk? Nobody wants to talk. And how do I fit in a 15-decade rosary? It's not about that. These are about simple rituals of connection for about 10 minutes for each of these, and some of them overlap, so time management 101, and a little bit more during the week. So let's talk about the daily of this, all right? When we say you have to work together, we mean simple things like, instead of saying, all right, it's time to clean up this house. You go clean up the living room, you clean your room, I'll clean the office, you do the kitchen, and we'll all, be done in an hour, and then maybe we can watch something. It's, no, let's spend some time. We just got done with dinner. Let's do the dishes together. You guys clear it, I'll wash, you dry, and let's just kid around and talk about our day. So you're talking together, and you're talking about your day and how it all went, and you're doing dishes together, and it's a ritual. Everybody expects to do it, but suddenly, instead of just, oh, it's one more chore, it's time together. I know my mom and dad, they had an excellent marriage. They were crazy about each other, and they did a lot of wonderful things together and had great world adventures because of the work my father did with CBS television. They got to do a lot. But when I would ask my mom, what was your favorite thing you ever did with dad? She'd say, when we would have our friends over, because they had this round robin thing where they'd get together with their friends once a month for a dinner party. And when it was my mom and dad's turn to host it, they'd have their friends over, and they couldn't wait for their friends to leave because my mom would wash the dishes and my dad would dry, and then they'd exchange all the gossip because the men were with the men and the women were with the women, and they'd compare notes. And she said, we would have so much fun catching up with each other. That was a work ritual, a talk ritual, and for them a play ritual. And it took them like 20 minutes to clean up together. Just getting that connection instead of, oh, it's your night to do the dishes, I'm going to go turn on Netflix.
But we have this tendency to think that we have to save all of marital intimacy up for date night, right? Which we only get maybe once a quarter if you're lucky. And then there's so much loaded onto that time that you end up just arguing the entire time because you're not used to spending any time with each other.
Yeah, no, come on, think about this. Ever happen? Because it's happened to us, all right? Finally, it's the night away from the kids. You get all dressed up. You pretend that you could actually fit into the dress you were wearing when you were still single. And you go out for dinner, and there's, candlelight, and it's a nice restaurant, and you sit there, and it's crickets. Because you've promised yourself, we're not going to talk about the bills, and we're not going to talk about the kids. It's going to be like when we were dating. And it's not. And now you're exhausted because you've gotten out of the house and you've gotten the babysitter and the kids didn't want you to leave and the communication isn't going well, and then you get home and everybody expects to have sex, but you don't really want to because you don't feel connected to each other, and it's just a mess.
So none of you can relate to that, I'm sure.
None.
But,
Nobody's ever. I'm just a little embarrassed.
Yeah,
no, it happens to everybody at least once.
And so look, what we're talking about here, creating these little rituals of connection, allow you to use your everyday relationship as a way of connecting to each other. It's not just let's get all the chores done so we can finally get some time together. It's let's use the life that we've got to connect with each other around those activities. You know, so whether it's doing the dishes together or going grocery shopping together, I mean, you don't have to do everything together. I don't mean you have to be glued to each other's sides constantly, but making a point, being intentional about saying, how are we going to get some time to work and play and talk and pray together today? And really prioritizing that. And as I started to say earlier, how revolutionary would it be if Catholic families did the opposite of what the world says? What if we were to look at our schedules and say, let's prioritize family life first. Let's prioritize making sure that we got the time that we need to work and play and talk and pray, and then we'll fit in other activities if we can. As opposed to, let's fit on all the activities that we can, and then we'll see if we can have a family life, maybe if we have any time or energy left over at the end of that. So I'm not saying that you can leave here today and just turn your entire lives all around, but start thinking about that. How could we do a better job of serving that virtue of justice by giving our relationships their due and really prioritizing on our schedules that time to work and play and talk and pray together every day as a couple and as a family? Because that's going to really change your life and allow you to experience a new quality of life so you can remember why you're doing all those other things that you're doing. The second building block of a more intimate relationship is emotional rapport and benevolence, which leads to the virtue of kindness. You know, love doesn't die. Most couples take it out in the backyard and shoot it, you know, or they just starve it to death, you know, because everything we do in a relationship either says I do or I don't, right? Like when we stand at the altar and we say I do, we don't just say it once, we have to say I do 1,000,000 times a day for the rest of our lives. And when we're not saying I do, like for example, if I have the opportunity to do those dishes, or help with the kids, or have that conversation, or whatever, those are all ways I could say I do. You know, or if we have an argument and I'm really working hard to still be respectful and listen to what she has to say instead of waiting for her to stop talking so I can finally say what the really thing is, you know, right? I mean, when I'm doing those things and I'm really trying to say I do in all those little moments. And so this idea of emotional rapport and benevolence looks for those little ways to make each other's lives a little easier or more pleasant every day. So for example, one of the first things that we'll ask each other every day is there something I can do that would make your life a little easier or more pleasant?
About this morning, we'll say, how's your day shaping up? Is there anything I can do to make your life easier today?
Now, sometimes we don't spend a lot of time together in the course of a day. You know, I might be in session all day, she's running the kids around or whatever.
Like any other couple.
Right, but you know, there might be that meeting that I'm particularly worried about, and I could tell her about it, and I could say, you know what, I could really use a prayer at that time. And then she remembers that, and she sends me a little text that says, hey, I know you're going to that meeting in 5 minutes, I'm praying for you. That really means a lot to me, you know? She did something little that made my day a little easier or more pleasant, even though she's not there.
And suddenly you know you're not alone. So looking for those moments and asking. You know, a guy came up to Greg after a conference like this once and said, it took me 25 years to find out I wasn't going to get any credit for something my wife didn't want me doing in the first place. Because he was guessing. Had a guy call our radio station once. Honest to goodness, a real story. Calls on the radio station and says, what should I get my wife for her birthday?
I was like, dude, if you're asking me, you got bigger problems.
Ask, okay? If you think that love means that they know what you want, that's the biggest lie that'll wreck your marriage. That's Satan. Nobody gave your spouse a mind-reading gift when he said or she said, I do. Ask. What do you want for your birthday? What can I do to make your day better? How are you doing today? Really have a conversation.
One of the little exercises we recommend in our book For Better Forever, A Catholic Guide to Lifelong Marriage, is what we call a love list. And it's where each of you writes down at least 25-ish, you know, things that would make you feel cherished if they happened. And there should be little things. You know, we're not talking about the big vacation to the Caymans or something. You know.
No, it's not a bucket list. It's a love list.
And it's not a complaint list either. It's not, I'd feel loved if you picked up your damn socks. You know, it's.
Church.
You know, it's you know I feel loved when I come downstairs in the morning and the dishwasher's already empty. You know, that really makes me feel loved. I feel loved when you get my favorite ice cream. You know, I feel loved.
One of mine, honestly, right off the love list that I made when all our kids were tiny, our bigger kids were all tiny, on my love list was, I really feel loved when you give me 5 uninterrupted minutes in the bathroom alone. No fingers under the door.
Yeah.
No. That was like a trip to Aruba, if I could get that. But he wouldn't have known that because kids don't chase him into the bathroom when he's going to the bathroom. They chase me. So I had to tell him that.
You know,
And
so-
it worked.
And so you write down those things, that love list, and you just look at it every day. And you say, you know, what's one little thing, or maybe 2 little things here that I could do that would make my spouse's life a little easier or more pleasant? And you know, Pope Francis talks a lot about kindness, the virtue of kindness. And I think kindness is kind of overlooked in the pantheon of Christian virtues, because we seem it's like it's such a little thing. But I think love, kindness is love's little sister. You know, where love is working for the good of the other person. It's that commitment to work for the overall good of the other person. Kindness is the willingness to look for those little ways that I can make your day a little easier or more pleasant. And it makes a huge difference. I mean, just look at how the world has tuned into Pope Francis's witness just through those little acts of kindness, like, you know, cold calling a single mom, or letting a child with Down syndrome come up on the altar and play with him, or, you know, just stopping the papal motorcade to just, you know, give somebody a blessing. Those little acts of kindness rock the world. And those little acts of kindness can rock your marriage too.
And we're really getting at least aware of kindness as a society. There's sort of a kindness movement. There are shirts now that say, if you can be anything in the world, be kind, which
Pay it
I
forward,
really
those
like
kinds of
those.
things.
So there's things like, okay, you're in line at the coffee shop and you pay for the person's coffee behind you, but will you get your husband's favorite ice cream? Maybe not. It's easy to be
Will
kind.
you let your wife have the remote?
It's easy to be kind to a stranger. It's not as easy to be kind with somebody who you're living with every single day, and sometimes gets on your nerves.
And they know I love them anyway, so why do I have to do that?
Because kindness to a stranger costs us nothing and makes us feel great. Kindness to your spouse makes you a little bit humble and makes you realize that you have the power to affect their life in a good way, but you may have to overlook some of the things that you're not too happy about in order to be kind. So it's a much deeper and more powerful spiritual exercise than buying somebody at Starbucks a cup of coffee.
The next building block of our marriage castle is self-regulation. And self-regulation is the virtue of self-control. I always remind people, anger is God's gift to you, not other people, right? You know, God gives, we experience anger as an emotional way of waking us up to an injustice. Okay? And that's the Holy Spirit sort of saying, hey, there's something wrong here that needs your attention. You should attend to that. That's anger. But sometimes we take that gift of anger and we want to re-gift it. You know?
And my anger can change the world. If I scream enough at my kid, he will never put the bike in the driveway again.
If I yell enough at my spouse, they will remember to do that thing. They won't be mean to me, or they won't. If I just vent this all, then that problem will never happen again. That's not how it works. You know, anger doesn't really change anything. It alerts us to the problem, and then what we need to do with that is bring that anger to God and say, okay, God, first of all, what are you calling my attention to? Because sometimes I think it's that I'm mad at her, when really what it is I didn't have enough protein today. You know? So, okay, God, I'm feeling angry right now. What is it exactly that you want me to pay attention to? And, I'm not upset about the crooked picture frame on the room, on the wall. It's really that I have to actually come up with a plan to get this project done in time. Oh, okay, So that's number one, bringing it to God and saying, what am I angry about? And then number two, then saying, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do about it? Give me some idea of a plan. And I don't have to have, a plan ready in triplicate for filing in the home office or something like that, but it's about being able to have some foggy idea about what God might want me to do. When I have those two things, then I can go to my wife, or she can come to me and say, hey, honey, listen, I was really upset about thus and such, and I was wondering if maybe we could do this and that about it. What do you think? And that's a productive conversation. That's a whole lot better than, I'm really sick and tired of you doing thus and such, and you better just get your crap together already, because if you don't, then, and then going on from there.
What are you going to do? And
right?
remember to say that, what do you think? Because you may have come up with one piece of the puzzle that God's given you for how to fix the problem. But your wife might or husband might have the other piece of the puzzle, and only in asking, hey, what do you think we should do? Or better yet, go back to what we talked about this morning and say, how about we pray together about what we should do? That you'll get the whole picture, the whole puzzle together.
And then people, people laugh at us about some of this stuff. Like, well, that's not how normal people deal with things. That's not, well, no, it's not, but that's why the divorce rate is at 50%, for crying out loud. I mean, when we look at, it's not about being normal, it's about being holy, right? It's not, holy isn't normal, let's face it. If you wanted to be normal, you shouldn't have been Catholic in the first place. We're all crazy. And we're rejoicing in that craziness. And the idea of self-control, this whole idea of self-regulation, it's a lifelong process. Nobody's going to leave here today and master this. But at least having that idea that, anger is God's gift to me. It's not my, and I'm not supposed to re-gift that. It's my invitation to enter into that prayer where I can just reflect, okay, God, what are you pointing out to my attention here, and what do you want me to do about it? Then I'm ready to go do something about it once I've taken down that emotional temperature.
The fourth pillar to this living a holy marriage is a positive intention frame or a positive intention mindset. And the virtues that come with that are charity and forbearance. Okay? Every behavior. Now, you're going to sit there and your wheels are going to be turning and you're going to be running behaviors through your head. But every behavior is actually an attempt to meet a need or an intention, especially the really obnoxious behaviors. This applies to even antagonistic actions, comments as well, but to meet a positive intention, but most of the time we do it in a really knuckle-headed way.
Now, I do want to offer one qualifier. I mean, this does apply, it does apply actually even to abusive behavior, but that's a different category altogether that you should not have to deal with on your own, okay? If we're talking about somebody, a spouse being abusive and they're verbally abusive or physically abusive or abusive in any other way, they think that they're doing something good. They think they're trying to solve a problem in a way that makes sense to them. That's not healthy, and you should seek professional help for that. We're not asking you to make excuses for bad behavior. But what a positive intention frame does is it gives you a way to deal with the normal obnoxious things that we do to each other in a respectful way. To be able to go to the other person and say to them, look, when you did thus and such, it really hurt my feelings. But I'm guessing that that's not what you intended to do. What were you trying to do with that? Okay? So I can come to them and I can say that this was hurtful, and I can acknowledge the offense, but I'm doing it in a way that's giving them the benefit of the doubt and saying, I'm sure you didn't intend that. What were you trying to do? Not so that they can excuse the behavior, but so we could talk about another way to do that.
And so we can get to the root of it. So maybe they were lashing out, but they're really just feeling very scared about something. Or whatever it is, but it's the idea of not, oh, well, they didn't really mean it, so, they're just dealing with a lot of rage and scary stuff right now, so I'm just going to let them get away with it. That's not what we're talking about with positive intention. We're talking about saying, what did you really mean by that? Where is this coming from? So that you can find a way to meet that need in a good, holy, godly, and just way in your marriage that will elevate both of you, not diminish either of you.
And again, the virtues that come out of that, charity and forbearance. So I mean, this suggestion, this idea of positive intention frame, this is drawn from the research of the Gottman Relationship Institute. It's secular research, it's good stuff. But there's a virtue component to it where we can see the charity and the forbearance that comes from that. The charity comes from assuming the best about the other person. The forbearance comes from not unloading both barrels on them just because they upset me in the first place. I'm assuming, look, when you wake up in the morning, you do not look for 25 ways to tick off your spouse, right? Now, it can seem like that sometimes, okay? But neither does your spouse try to think of 25 ways to tick you off, okay? Whatever we do because we think it's good. We think we're trying to meet some need or positive intention, and sometimes we screw it up, or sometimes we're misunderstood. So that idea of a positive intention frame allows us to kind of step back and say, look, whatever you were trying to do didn't come off, but help me understand what that was so we can figure out a better way forward. And doing that for each other really allows you to bring that grace into your relationship, to help each other become everything you were created to be.
And I would say that if you are sitting there saying, I could say that to my spouse till I'm blue in the face and they will stonewall me, they will never go any deeper, they will never look at their motivation at anything, that's when you get professional help. Because that is a situation where they're not showing you the respect you deserve, they're not showing themselves the respect they deserve enough to actually work toward getting their needs met in a positive way and working for the good of your relationship. And that's when you call a faithful counselor to get the help you need.
The next building block in our marriage castle is caretaking in conflict. Caretaking in conflict. Now, this is a surprising one. Everybody who's ever been to a marriage workshop or ever put on a marriage workshop, what is it's all about what? Communication, right? Communication. Everybody always says, a great relationship, it's all about communication. You got to learn communication, you got to teach communication. It's all about communication. That's actually not right. Actually, there's interesting new research that comes out that says that communication is the second most important thing in a healthy relationship. The first most important thing is caretaking. And here's why. You can teach a couple. What they did was, in this one study, they taught two sets of couples. Well, they taught one set of couples communication rules, and they used them. Okay, but the couples who followed all of those rules but were poor caretakers in conflict still had a terrible relationship. Where the couples who didn't follow those rules but were good caretakers in the conflict actually were much happier than the couples who followed all the communication rules. Now, when I say caretaking in conflict, what do I mean? We mean little things like, well, the idea of praying together in the conflict, but it also little things like, hey, look, you know what, my throat's really dry. I'm going to go grab a drink. Can I get you something? Or, that positive intention thing. It's like, look, what you said really hurt my feelings. I'm sure that's not what you meant, but what did you mean?
Or saying something as simple as, I really hate that we're fighting right now, but I love you, and I know if we stick with this, we can make it through this together.
Or thanks for hanging in there with me through this. This is really hard, but I really appreciate you sticking with me.
That's taking care of the other person and the relationship instead of dying on the hill of your point no matter what. And as we said before, with that time where we prayed, he prayed, and I had prayed, and then we prayed together. When we came back together and prayed together, that was taking care of each other. We, honest to goodness, have no idea. We could make something up, but it would be a lie. We don't know what that fight was about. But we remember that we cared enough about each other to take it to God and pray about it, and to pray with each other. So just taking that minute of even saying, I know we're at a stalemate here and we're both furious, but let's have ice cream.
I mean, that sounds crazy, but it's okay to step away from that fight for a little bit. By the way, the opposite of anger isn't calm. It's empathy. Because a lot of times people take breaks, okay? They take breaks. I'm done talking about this. We need a break. And then they walk away from each other and they don't talk about it. And they ignore each other for a couple of hours and they watch some TV. And then eventually it all calms down and then they just come back together and pretend it didn't happen. And that was a break. That's not a break, okay?
And I promise it'll come back around worse the next time.
Yeah, because they became calm, but they didn't do anything to empathize, okay? When you take a break, the task of that break is to step away and say, okay, how can I, even though I think my spouse is crazy, how can I appreciate where they're coming from here? There's got to be, they're not completely nuts. I know there's some value to what they were saying. There's some greater good that they're chasing here. How can I at least get to a place where I can love them and appreciate where they're coming from? When you can do that, then you can re-engage. Then you've had a successful break because you've cultivated empathy, not just calm. Right? So that idea of caretaking in conflict allows you to have empathy for each other so you can come back to each other later on and say, look, I do want what I want out of this, but I want you to know that your needs are important to me too. Help me understand this so we can both get what we want out of this.
Right, and one side note, if you take a break from an argument, say when you're coming back and do it. Don't just go, I need a break, and walk out. It's, hey, you know what, this has gotten too heated, and I love you too much to let this take control of our relationship. So let's just calm down and come back in and be honest. How long is it going to take? Is it a half an hour? Is it 2 hours? For me, When I was an exhausted hormonal mess of a mom, it's let me get a good night's sleep. Worst advice you'll ever get is don't let the sun go down on your anger. I know it's scriptural. That does not mean stay up and argue till 4 o'clock in the morning until you're spinning out of control. It's a great way to mess up your marriage.
You know, again, if you look at anger the way I was talking about before, where anger is God's gift to you, okay, don't let the sun go down on your anger before you go to God and say, okay, Lord, what are you calling my attention to, and what do you want me to do about it? Well, maybe God wants you to do about it is sleep on it until the next morning, you know?
You know, and I would say to Greg, or he would say to me, and I'd have to take it, sweetie, maybe we just need to get some rest and look at this with fresh eyes tomorrow. But tomorrow, we'll make a date and talk about it as soon as I get home from work. Or we'll set the clock for half an hour early and we'll talk about whatever it is, and then keep that date. Because if you just say, well, I just need a break, it's a slap in the face to your spouse. They don't feel like you're invested in the situation. So make sure you come back to it.
Building block number 6 is mutual respect, accountability, and boundaries. These are all sort of tied up together, even though they can seem like different things. Respect is not just about being nice to each other. It's about seeing the truth and the goodness and the beauty in all the things your mate finds true, good, and beautiful. You know, I might not agree with her. I might not appreciate all the things that she appreciates, but I love her enough to know she's got a good head on her shoulder. So if she thinks something or likes something or tells me something, I have to recognize there's some value in that. Okay? Respect makes me say she's a person who deserves to be heard. Okay? So for instance, and we'll talk about this probably more in the panel, you know, we had a lot of people coming up to us and talk about, well, what do you do about all this stuff if you're married to somebody who doesn't respect your religion, you know, who's hostile to your faith? And one of the things, and this is a good example of this, because very often when religion is a problem in marriage, it's really not about religion at all. It's about respect. Because couples who really respect each other, even if they have faith differences, that less faithful partner will say, you know, this isn't really my thing. I don't really get this whole God thing, but I know it means something to them and I want to support that and try to understand it as best I can. So they'll show up for family prayer time. Maybe they're quiet during that time, but they're there. Or they go to Mass with their spouse, not necessarily because it's their thing, but because they understand that it means something. And they're trying to understand it from their spouse's perspective because they respect their spouse. In couples where there is not that respect, what you see is, you keep that away from me. I don't want to have anything to do with that. It's not a rejection of religion, it's a rejection of the basic value of respect in the relationship. And so mutual accountability, respect, and boundaries has to do with recognizing that what you have to say to me, even if I disagree with it, even if I don't see it the same way, even if I don't value it, it has value. And I owe it to you as a person that I love to hear that and try to understand the truth and the goodness and the beauty in it.
And I want to add that if you're in that situation, that respect has to go both ways. You know, if your spouse is saying to you, I don't want to have anything to do with your religion, at least have enough respect for them to realize that that's coming from some place of pain, all right? It may be that they feel like you're spiritually cheating on them. You know, suddenly you're going to church all the time and spending all this time with God, and they don't feel like you love them as much as you love God. That doesn't mean you give up God, but it means you redouble your efforts to show your spouse how much you love them. So that respect in an argument or in anything with a point of view has to go both ways. And that's where that communication of, I'm really not getting what you're saying here and it really seems hurtful. Help me to understand.
And again, if you're struggling with that, that's a good indication that you might need some professional support. Because that failure of respect in a relationship is really critical to anything else. If you don't respect each other, you really can't have love, because respect allows you to acknowledge the other person is a person who deserves to be heard. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that they're a person who deserves to be heard, you can't do anything in your marriage. So that's not an issue you can dance around. That's an issue that requires you to go seek professional help for that so that you can address it and heal it.
And if you're saying, well, my spouse would never go anyway. Go without them.
To a marriage-friendly therapist. That's the qualifier. Because here's the thing. There are a lot of therapists who will tell you they do marriage therapy because they've been doing it for 20 years, but they've been doing it for 20 years wrong. Okay? A marriage-friendly therapist is one who has specific training in marriage therapy, who has supervision in marriage therapy, and who actually believes in the value of marriage. There's a website, marriagefriendlytherapists.com, for local referrals. all of our therapists through the Pastoral Solutions Institute's telephone counseling practice are marriage-friendly therapists. The success rate for an average therapist who does marriage therapy is about 30%. The success rate for a marriage-friendly therapist in marriage counseling is over 90%.
And if you add in a marriage-friendly therapist who knows systems theory, it goes up from there. So systems theory is a little bit like, you know those mobiles kids make in school? You know, you put a bunch of things on strings on a wire hanger, and then, you know, you touch one and the whole thing moves. If you're sitting there saying, my spouse would never go, and you go to a marriage-friendly therapist who knows systems theory, they're going to help you change the system in your marriage just enough and in respectful and loving ways that the other person starts to change.
Yeah, because a lot of times they don't want to go to therapy because the marriage is working for them. You know, they're getting what they want, right? And so if they change, well, then they don't get what they want anymore. But if you work with a marriage-friendly therapist who can do this even by yourself, you can learn to both build rapport and set boundaries in a way that sort of spoils their unhealthy marriage, but also leaves the door open for a healthier relationship. And it can be a little tricky, but it's definitely very possible and very successful. So if you're the only one who wants to work on it, don't feel demoralized at all, because there's a lot you can do. And we do a lot of that work through our counseling practice at CatholicCounselors.com. The seventh building block is reviewing and learning from mistakes, and the virtue here is wisdom. You know, a lot of couples argue and vent, and then they break away from what happened, and then, like you said, they hope it's never going to happen again. But we should never underestimate our capacity to be surprised by the same darn thing happening over and over and over. You know, it happened yesterday, and it happened the day before, and it happened the day before that, but it happened right now. Who'd have thunk it?
You know, and often it's a cyclical kind of thing. It happens every time we have to pay the bills. It happens every time one of the kids gets sick and we have to figure out, you know, who's going to take care of them and take off work. It happens every time somebody's hormones are off in the house. It happens every time your mother visits. But it's a cycle. It comes around. And if we can take what happened and examine it and say, okay, how do we do this better next time? What kind of plan do we want to come up with that works for everybody on this? Instead of, well, I'll just have to suffer through it. Yeah. Or I'll just do this and see if it changes, but I'm not going to clue anybody else in on what I'm doing. If we really examine that together and make a plan, and if you have to revise the plan after that, you do it.
This is not about refighting the thing. Like, one of the things, the biggest challenge I face in marriage counseling a lot of times is getting couples off the idea that they have to agree what happened. You will never agree who started it. You'll never agree whose fault it was. You'll never actually even agree on what actually happened. And that's okay. Even the happiest couples never agree on what happened. If you can agree that you didn't like what happened, that's enough. Because what you're going to do then is have a conversation about how can we handle it better the next time so it doesn't happen again.
And it's not, I didn't like when you said, get away from the what happened. Not, well, you said this, I didn't like it. I didn't like that when we were under this pressure, we fell apart, we argued, we didn't treat each other with respect.
How are we going to handle it
How
better
are we
next
going to
time?
handle it the next time?
Okay. And then so you can have that conversation where you review the last conflict, but you're reviewing it in a way that you're not refighting it, which is allowing you to develop wisdom because you're able to learn from your mistakes and think forward here and recognize the next time this happens, we're ready for it. And we have a plan for it. And you know, will it always go perfectly? No. But you don't have to be afraid of failure then, because you've made it safe to make mistakes with each other, because you can go back and learn from it instead of going back and crucifying each other for those mistakes. Right?
Okay, and we're up against our time, so let's hit the last one, which is 8, which is getting good support.
And that's the virtue of humility. You know, we have a tendency to think that humility is beating up on ourselves. It's running ourselves down. It's not actually. Humility is the recognition that I can't do it all by myself. You know, if pride is the vice that had Satan saying, I will not serve, you know, or the pride is the vice that has us saying, I will find my own way to happiness and I don't need you to tell me what to do and I'm not going to share what I've got with you. Humility is the virtue that says, I want to be happy, but I know that I don't have the wisdom to be able to do that all on my own. I need to learn from you. And so, you know, a lot of times when we go through tough times in relationships, or even just in the course of our relationship, we think we have to rely entirely on our own power, on our own knowledge, and we don't reach out for support in the first place. Or if we do, we go to the people that are struggling the same way we are, so that they'll just cheer us on and say, oh yeah, you've got it exactly right, poor you. You know, and we'll have somebody who's on our corner. We have to be willing to be humble enough to reach out for support, but get good support. Go to those people that you respect, for example, people whose marriage you really admire, people who know both you and your spouse and love you both and want the best for both of you, who will give you advice that works for the good of your relationship, not just pat you on the back and tell you how awesome you are and what a jerk you married. You know? Or somebody, if you don't have somebody like that, going to somebody who can give you new tools. You know, whether that's your pastor or a good marriage retreat like this, or even a professional counselor that will teach you new skills to be able to go back in there and fight the good fight and actually do it in a way that glorifies God as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about this. You know, if your car broke down and you didn't have a clue what was under that engine, you wouldn't try to fix it yourself, and you wouldn't take it to your friend who has never driven a car in their lives. You'd take it to a good mechanic. Take it to somebody who really knows how to help you with it. That makes all the difference. It's the same with relationships. Get the real support that you need, and things can radically change for the good.
So, you know, with couples who are practicing all these different virtues, these different habits, you know, it's not just about having a great relationship, right? It's really about growing in holiness, too. You know, we have a tendency to sometimes think that working on our marriage is kind of selfish. You know, it just benefits us. You know, there are other people who have bigger problems and other greater works to do, and that's all true, sure. But don't do those things and neglect your relationship or downgrade your relationship and the work you do on your relationship because somehow that's not valuable in the kingdom of God. Because your marriage is a ministry. And doing these things is hard work. But when you're doing these things, these are all activities that convey God's love to your spouse and give a good witness to your kids about what a godly love looks like. And also bear witness to the world of what godly love looks like. And that world is hurting for an example of that kind of love. And you don't have to be perfect at this, but if you're looking at these kinds of things and saying, you know, I want to get better at that. We want to challenge each other to live out these virtues in our relationship. Yeah, so that we can have a great marriage, but ultimately so that we can help each other become everything God created us to be, and we can help each other get to heaven. Then that's what ultimately allows us to celebrate the fullness of the sacrament of our marriage and really live the Catholic vision of love to its fullest so that we can truly celebrate a joyful Catholic relationship that fills our hearts with that love that can't fail and allows us to really be that witness to the world that God asks all of you to be. Thanks so much for being with us today. God bless everybody.
And I just wanted to invite you, if you haven't heard us before, we are on every day at Eastern
10.
here, right? So
Yeah,
we're here
10,
10.
yeah.
So 10 o'clock on your local Catholic radio station, 98.3 FM, WCLP Radio. And I thank that station, those station owners, thank you so much for that ministry. If you can't hear it as you're going over the mountains and through the woods, you can listen to it on either the AveMariaRadio.net app or the EWTN radio app. Both of them are completely free apps, and you can follow us through there.
Or if you have Sirius XM, it's channel 130.
That's right, channel 130 on Sirius XM. And it's a call-in show, so if you're sitting here thinking, but there's so many questions I want to ask, you can actually call in and ask them any day you want. So thank you again to 98.3 FM, and listen to them, please.